Welcome to Unit 7, Work with Diverse People. The assessments include written questions, so there's 46 written questions, which includes a survey and 2 scenario assessments. 7.1 Introduction. So what is the definition of diversity? It's many different types of people being included in something, or a large range of people that differ in some ways. And this unit is about working with diverse people. So we want to look firstly at social diversity. And so this is a range of difference seen amongst people in a society in culture, politics, religion, economic status, linguistics, and individual diversity. So we're going to look at cultural diversity, political diversity, diversity in religion, economic diversity, and individual diversity. The impact of social diversity is greater for minority groups because they can experience exclusion and discrimination, they can be marginalised. But the positive impact of social diversity is a richness of different perspectives and different ways of doing things. It means a much richer culture. Cultural diversity is difference in style or mode of life of a particular group, includes rituals, customs, celebrations, dress, language, and relationship. Culture is related to a person's ethnicity. Culture and cultural diversity impacts all of a person's work and life. If we look at Australian cultural diversity, we have people who originate from 200 different countries, speak 300 different languages, 7.8 million were born overseas, or 33%. About half the population have both parents born in Australia. 8 million, approximately 1/3, have both parents born overseas. Cultural diversity. The 2016 census says we have 23.4 million, and we have had another census since then, which puts it up around 25 million. Since 1945, Australia has successfully settled over 7.5 million people. 650,000 people identified themselves as Indigenous Australians. Internet searches list 19 Jewish schools, 40 Islamic schools, and 8 Greek Orthodox schools across Australia. There are 14 Aboriginal independent community schools in WA and 19 Indigenous schools in South Australia. So you can see that there is a fair bit of cultural diversity in Australia. Ethnicity. This is a grouping of people who identify with each other based on shared attributes. So that could be language and culture, ancestry, homeland, traditions, history, religion, and social behaviours. Race is a category of humankind that shares certain distinctive physical, behavioural, and cultural attributes. In the past, the classifying of human populations was based mainly on physical appearance. So you had race groups that included Asian, American Indian, Alaska Native, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, European, and you can probably think of other race groups as well. Race has also been described as linguistic groups, the Arab race or the Latin race, religious groups, the Jewish race, national groups such as French, Spanish, and Chinese race. Generational diversity. People are grouped by years of birth and have distinguishing characteristics that are significantly different to people from other generations. The generation gap is a difference in actions, beliefs, and opinions between one generation and another. This often refers to a perceived gap between younger and older people. And whether that gap is there, sometimes people perceive it, sometimes people feel there's not very much gap. Generational groups. The silent generation, 1925 until 1942, and so my mum and dad were from the silent generation. The baby boomers, 1942 to the early 1960s, and I'm from the baby boomers. Generation X, 1960s to the early 1980s. Generation Y, 1980s to the early 2000s, and my children are all Generation Y. Generation Z, early 2000s to the 2020s. Generation Alpha, 2020 to the present day. Some people say that Generation Alpha actually goes back to 2010. So there's some difference. These are not set in concrete, these year levels. Disability diversity. To be considered a disability, the impairment or condition must impact daily activities, communication and/or mobility, and has lasted or is likely to last 6 months or more. And this is the type of disability diversity. It can result from accidents, illness, genetic disorders, includes physical, which affects a person's mobility or dexterity, intellectual, affects a person's ability to learn, mental illness, affects a person's thinking process, sensory, affects a person's ability to hear or see, neurological, affects a person's brain and central nervous system, a learning disability, a physical disfigurement, or immunological, which is the presence of organisms causing disease in the body. So they're the different types of disability diversity. Sexual orientation. This refers to a person's romantic or sexual attraction to another person, includes heterosexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, asexual or same-sex attracted LGBTQI+. Sexual orientation, LGBTQI+, is an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex and queer communities. There's not one LGBTQI community, but a diverse group of individuals from many different backgrounds with distinct histories and experiences. It is correct to refer to LGBTIQ+ communities. Gender diversity. This is the different ways in which a person identifies or expresses their masculine or feminine characteristics. A person's gender identity or gender expression is not always exclusively male or female, and it may change over time. Gender diversity, there's two main types. Cisgender, this people who identify their gender in the same way it was legally assigned to them at birth, or transgender or trans and gender diverse are people whose gender identity is different to that which was legally assigned to them at birth. Trans and gender diverse people may take steps to live in their nominated gender with or without medical treatment. Sister girl is a culturally specific term to describe Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander transgender women. Brother boy, a culturally specific term to describe Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander transgender men. Intersex are people who were born with a genetic, hormonal or physical sex characteristics that do not conform to the medical norms for male or female bodies. Intersex people have a diversity of bodies and identities. Endosex refers to people whose sex characteristics meet medical and social norms for typically male or female bodies. So that's sexual diversity, gender diversity. And then we have religious diversity. In Australia, 40% of people have indicated they don't have any religion at all. Christianity is the most common religion, with about 44% of people identifying as Christian. The largest Christian denominations are Catholic, 20%, and Anglican, 9.8%. Other major religious groups include Islam, 3.2%, Hinduism, 2.7%, and Buddhism, 2.4%. Australian Aboriginal religion and mythology is the sacred spirituality represented in the stories performed by Aboriginal Australians within each of the language groups across Australia in ceremonies. Aboriginal spirituality includes the Dreamtime, songlines, and Aboriginal oral literature. The key areas of diversity in religion are core beliefs, such as a belief in a single God or creator, or no belief in a creator God. Main identities are Buddha, Jesus and Muhammad, and the other key area is the way in which the religion is practiced. So they're the key areas of religious diversity. And then we have political diversity. Australia's political system is a democracy which has free and competitive elections. Citizens are free to be members of a political party and to take part in elections for government. And there's a broad range of political views and allegiances, from very conservative to very progressive. Some Australians have mixed positions, with an allegiance to a particular party mixed with political views from another party or another position. The 47th Parliament, the Parliament that we're now in, is the most diverse in Australia's history, but it still comes nowhere close to reflecting the population that this Parliament represents. The biggest gains have been made in the proportion of women representatives, now making up 38% of the House of Representatives and 57% of the Senate. And this is a record for both chambers. But we're still well below the 23% of Australians that claim a non-European ancestry. Just 6.6%, or 15 out of the 227 MPs, have an overseas non-European background. Only 4.4% of MPs in the Parliament have an Asian heritage, even though 18% of the Australian population have an Asian heritage. So we've probably still got a little way to go there to have our Parliament truly representing the Australian people, which is a very diverse group. The Australian political system is a constitutional monarchy with a king as its head of state, whose powers are limited by a constitution. The reality is that the king is really a figurehead and doesn't play really any role in Australian politics at all. Australia has a wide variety of political parties that all represent different political views, from right-wing or conservative to left-wing or progressive. The Coalition, which is the Liberal and National Party, represent the right-wing or the conservative view on most issues, and the Labor Party typically represent the left-wing or the more left or more progressive. And the Greens are probably even more left-wing and, concerned with environmental issues particularly. Political diversity can minimally impact the work and life of Australians. A left-wing or Labor government tends to be more socially progressive, and a right-wing government, such as a Coalition, tends to have a focus on the economy and business. This can impact our funding and boarding. Economic diversity. Access to a well-paid full-time employment is a prerequisite to being able to enjoy the rewards of the Australian economic system. And that also brings with it, of course, things like superannuation, healthcare, sickness and accident benefits as well. There's great economic diversity in Australia. Some people have inherited wealth and assets. Some have high-paying salaries, or they have a business or investment income. People have average full-time salaries. There are low-paid workers. There are part-time and casual workers, and there are the unemployed. The impact for low-paid workers, part-time workers, casual workers and the unemployed is that they are not really able to enjoy the rewards of the Australian economic system to the full extent that other people do. They have limited access to superannuation, healthcare, sickness and accident benefits. So to summarise this, boarding residences that understand and respect differences and encourage all people to interact harmoniously are richer, healthier and fairer places for students to grow in. Supervisors have this very significant role in the lives of students in their care. They provide a safe and inviting environment that acknowledges and respects difference and values the uniqueness of each person in their community. For some students, this might be a rare experience in their lives. So, question 14 is asking you to describe your own culture, ethnicity, community, language, customs, important ceremonies and celebrations. What is your story? And then question 15, describe something from your culture that you do or don't do that could cause offence to a person from another culture. So for example, your culture might include going to the pub on Friday night with your mates for a few beers to watch footy, but this could be quite offensive to a person from a culture that does not drink alcohol or go to places where alcohol is served. So that's question 15. So if you can describe something from your culture that you do or don't do that could cause offence to a person from another culture. So let's look at Australia and the United Nations. Australia was a founding member of the United Nations and played a prominent role in the negotiation of the United Nations Charter in 1945. It's one of the 8 nations involved in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And here's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It contains 30 articles on the most fundamental rights and freedoms of people everywhere in the world. And you can see these, I'm not going to read through all of them, but Articles 1 and 2 are about affirming human dignity. Articles 3 to 11, the rights of the individual, right to life, outlawing of slavery, torture, etc. 12 to 17, the rights of individuals within civil and political society, and so on. And you can see these other articles here. Australia is also party to the 7 core international human rights treaties. You can see those 7 international human rights treaties there. These are like covenants or promises that we make, and that we covenant to do this in Australia. And then the Australian government will make laws or statutes to make sure that we can actually achieve these human rights treaties. All right, so let's have a look at discrimination. Discrimination means the treating of one person less favourably than another due to personal characteristics. In Australia, there's anti-discrimination legislation at a state and national level. It's unlawful to discriminate on the basis of protected attributes, including age, disability, race, sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Australia's federal anti-discrimination laws are contained in the following legislation: the Age Discrimination Act, the Disability Discrimination Act, the Racial Discrimination Act, Sex Discrimination Act. A breach of discrimination legislation can result in legal action and penalties. The maximum penalty per contravention for unlawful discrimination is $66,000 for a corporation and $13,320 for an individual. So we do have these laws about discriminating, and they do have some teeth. The Disability Discrimination Act is when a person is treated less favourably or not given the same opportunities as others because of their disability. It's unlawful to discriminate against a person in employment, education services, renting or buying a house, and accessing public places because of their disability. So that's the Disability Discrimination Act. And then there's age discrimination. This is when a person is treated less favourably than another person because of their age. It's against the law to treat people unfairly because of their age, and this protects students, older people, and everybody in between. And then we have racial discrimination, the unfair treatment or vilification of a person based on their race, colour, descent, or national or ethnic origin. Sex discrimination, discriminating against a person because of their sex. And what else? It is because of their sex, gender identity, intersex status, sexual orientation, marital or relationship status, family responsibilities such as being pregnant or might become pregnant or breastfeeding, etc. So that's the definition of sex discrimination. If we look at the protection of human rights in Australia, Australia does not have a Bill of Rights like America, but it does protect human rights by laws, federal, state and territory laws, the Constitution and common law. It protects traditional rights and freedoms, for example, freedom of speech, opinion, religion, association and movement. So looking at human needs and rights, what is the difference or the relationship? We find that human needs are located within a human being, within a single human being, while human rights are located between two human beings or between a person and an organisation, a person and a government, etc. So having human rights can also be seen as a human need, which makes it confusing, doesn't it? Okay, So equal opportunity policy. Equal opportunity policy is about making sure that workplaces are free from all forms of unlawful discrimination and harassment. Workplace rules, policies, practices and behaviours that are fair and do not disadvantage people because they belong to a particular group. It involves eliminating any barriers that cause inequality in the employment of any given person or group of people. Equal opportunity laws. The Commonwealth laws and the state laws generally overlap and prohibit the same type of discrimination. However, both apply and an exception under one may not be an exception under the other. So you can see that the state and territory legislation and bodies that seek to enforce equal opportunity laws. Diversity practices in Australia have changed hugely over the past 30 or 40 years. There's been a rapid increase in women's workforce participation. There's legal protections for LGBTQIA plus people, and even the acronym is changing, and there are other acronyms at the moment as well. The concept of reconciliation with Australia's First Nations people, disability discrimination laws, action to tackle racism, such as the National Anti-Racism Campaign, Racism It Stops With Me, and 86% of Australians support this campaign. So what are the influences of social policy change in Australia? The government of the day drives change and it's influenced by a social agenda. For example, the ALP or the Greens have a particular social agenda, developing practice in other countries, what's happening in other countries, lobbying from special interest groups such as peak bodies, institutions and the church, and in the last 20 years particularly, the results of opinion polls or elections have influenced social policy change in Australia. So let's look at the impact of diversity practices and experiences. Diversity practices in Australia have changed significantly, but there are still some instances of exclusion and discrimination, particularly for some groups of people. And the impact of this, for those who experience exclusion and discrimination, they are more likely to have negative life experiences, more stress, poorer health, poorer mental health, and less positive relationships. So when we look at processes in the workplace, if you're experiencing discrimination or if you've been impacted by others not carrying out their responsibilities, what do you do? In the first instance, you could talk to them if you feel safe and comfortable to talk to them. You could do a verbal or a written report to your manager or your head of boarding, a formal complaint process, a grievance process. This could be a formal grievance process, and most people have these as part of their employment, pretty much everybody. Or you could go through a performance management process. When we look at employee rights, employees have a right to a workplace that is free from unlawful discrimination and harassment, be selected on merit for recruitment or promotion, be provided with training and development that enables productivity in work, equal access to benefits and conditions, fair processes to deal with work-related complaints and grievances. Employee responsibilities are that adhering to workplace code of conduct, act to prevent harassment and discrimination against others, respect differences amongst fellow employees, treat people fairly, recognise the skills and talents of others, attend work on time and carry out duties. Employer rights, so employers have rights too. They have the right to expect that employees will attend work and be on time, carry out the work role and adhere to the code of conduct. That's their minimum rights for employers. Employer responsibilities are to provide a healthy and safe work environment, a workplace that's free from unlawful discrimination and harassment, training and development that enables productivity at work, equal access to benefits and conditions, fair processes to deal with work-related complaints and grievances. Okay, so next we want to look at culture. 7.2 Culture. Australian society is made up of many cultural groups or subcultures, and this is from the area that people live in, racial origins, profession, religion, gender, a shared interest or a need. All of us belong to one or more cultural group, and we know and work with people who belong to different cultural groups. Cultural values are so ingrained from childhood, we automatically behave in a certain way. Culture is often compared to an iceberg. Some aspects are observable, and the other aspects cannot be directly observed. So a small amount is observable, but a large amount cannot be directly observed. So people behave the way they do for a reason. Every culture has its own way of doing things, its own set of rules. Most of us experience some discomfort or confusion when we're faced with behaviour we're not familiar with, or which doesn't follow the rules or the norms of our own culture. Acculturation. This is when a person moves from one culture to another, and they go through this process of adjustment and adapting their way of living to take on some of the values and some of the behaviours of the new culture. All people moving to a new culture context maintain their previous culture to some extent, but the degree of acculturation varies significantly. Some people do not change very much in the new culture. They maintain their cultural or ethnic identity. And this could be a conscious decision to avoid changing, or they may be so secure and enveloped in their subculture within the new culture that they are not influenced as much by outside contrast and difference. Most will change in some way. Varying degrees of acculturation can be called assimilation, separation, integration, or marginalisation. And we ask how this affects students coming into boarding. Students may find it stressful, tiring, embarrassing. There may be identity strain as they have to learn to fit in with a different culture in the boarding environment. They may also go through a struggle of conflicting loyalties and need a listening ear. So staff in boarding residences need to observe and get to know them, understand them and guide them appropriately. Cultural diversity. No matter where you live and work in Australia today, you'll be in constant contact with people from a range of cultural backgrounds. This means being in contact with people who choose to live their lives differently from the way that you do. Accepting cultural diversity is a basis for effective relationships in boarding residences and in the boarding residence community. You have a responsibility to behave in a way that shows respect for other people's cultural practices and beliefs. You have a right to expect that your own cultural practices and beliefs will be respected by others, and together we can celebrate the diversity in our boarding residence communities. So that's a responsibility to behave in a way that shows respect for other people's cultural differences, and a right to expect that your own cultural practices and beliefs will be respected by others. Celebrating cultural diversity means enjoying and being enriched by difference, being able to understand values held by others, being clear about your own values and those of your family and community, being comfortable with people and groups who hold different values and practices and different cultural traditions. Cultural awareness. What is it? Cultural awareness is accepting and showing respect for people of other cultures. So we inform ourselves about their cultures and accept and show respect for the cultures. They may hold different values, they may behave in different ways, they may have different ways of viewing the world, and they may have different approaches to the way they live their lives. Cultural awareness. You can accept and show respect for other cultures, even if certain practices seem strange to you or mean that you are inconvenienced. Each person in the boarding residence will have different levels of cultural awareness, depending on their prior involvement with other cultures. Increasing cultural awareness. How do we increase our cultural awareness? To increase our cultural awareness, we can do this by talking with and developing relationships with people of diverse backgrounds, travelling in other countries with a different culture, volunteering or working in a cross-cultural situation or context, reading books, watching movies, travel shows and documentaries based in other cultures, particularly true stories or biographies, to increase our cultural awareness. So what is cultural safety? Cultural safety is an environment that is spiritually, socially, emotionally and physically safe for people where there is no assault, challenge or denial of their identity, who they are and what they need. It is about shared respect, shared meaning, shared knowledge and experience of learning together. The 5 principles of cultural safety are reflecting on your own practice, minimising the power differentials, engaging in a conversation, undertaking the process of decolonisation, not diminishing, demeaning or disempowering others. What is cultural competence? Cultural competence is the ability to understand, communicate and effectively interact across cultures. It's the ability to participate ethically and effectively in personal and professional intercultural settings. It includes valuing diversity for the richness and creativity it brings to our society. So how do we achieve cultural safety? It starts with cultural awareness, then cultural competence, and then cultural safety. So we start with cultural awareness, then cultural competence, and this brings cultural safety. Question 31 asks, why is cultural awareness, cultural safety and cultural competence important in your role? It's essential to provide a safe, optimal experience for all students, that staff are culturally aware, the environment is culturally safe, and staff are culturally competent. Risk and protective factors for young people. Risk factors are elements in a student's environment that will increase the likelihood they will develop health or social problems. And these exist in different areas: community, family, school, and peer or individual. These are identifiable throughout their development and are consistent in effects across races and cultures. Protective factors are elements in a person's life that protect against risk in otherwise adverse circumstances by either reducing the impact of the risk or changing the way a student responds to the risk. Protective factors are elements in a person's life that buffer against risk. There's a table here that shows risk factors and protective factors, and you can see those 3 areas again: community, family and peers. So let's just have a look at a couple of these. So a risk factor is low community attachment, personal transition and mobility, laws and norms favourable to drug use, perceived availability of drugs, economic disadvantage. So they are risk factors that come from the community. Now, protective factors, things that can protect or buffer against those risk factors, are opportunities for pro-social involvement in the community, recognition of pro-social involvement, exposure to evidence-based programs and strategies. So you can see the rest of that table, but they are the risk factors and protective factors for young people. Marginalised individuals and groups. Marginalised individuals and groups often feel or are made to feel less important, less privileged, less respected than those who hold more status, power, privilege and opportunity in society. They may be considered outside the mainstream way of thinking and behaving. Marginalisation can occur in religion, mental health status, physical ability, socio-economic status, sexual orientation, sex, gender identity, weight, age and race. Being seen and treated as less than or excluded in some way has a long-lasting impact on the mental health of an individual. Marginalisation impacts on physical, psychological and emotional health in these ways. It can bring about anxiety, sadness, isolation, feeling of not being valued, stress, anger, fear, depression, self-blame, self-harm, abuse of alcohol and drugs. So steps to addressing marginalisation is recognising the behaviours, addressing those behaviours publicly, coaching individuals privately, supporting marginalised people and groups, affirm the commitment to inclusion publicly. So let's look at negative impact. Culture shock. For some students, boarding might be the first time they're immersed totally on a day and night, week-long basis in a completely different cultural environment. They may not have had to adapt and live in two worlds before, and they may be ill-prepared for such a shock. So the symptoms of culture shock include sadness and loneliness, not wanting to be around people, anxiety, worry over family, trouble concentrating, feeling left out or misunderstood, aches, pains, allergies. Could be sleep problems, depression, feeling powerless, anger, irritability, resentment, unable to resolve even simple problems, a lack of confidence, developing obsession such as over cleanliness, and feeling homesick. So they are the symptoms of culture shock, quite a lot of them. So how do we help? Number one is be a good listener. Show you understand the pressures that they're under. Help them find a way of switching off in playing a game, playing some music, doing a bit of sport, yoga, art. Help them make new friends. This is a key to being happy and settled. Connect through learning some of their language and valuing experiences and background. Assist with unfamiliar routines and give instructions slowly and clearly. Ensure that instructions are understood by seeking feedback. Help them keep in touch with family, home and their cultural identity. Involve a cultural broker or support group if possible. So let's look at discrimination. Discrimination is when a person or a group of people is treated less favourably than another person or another group because of their background or because of certain personal characteristics, and we call this direct discrimination. And the impact of discrimination can cause stress. It's linked to mental health issues, anxiety, depression, even in children, and it impacts on relationships, employment and overall health. Trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances, can be experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harming or threatening, can have a lasting adverse effect on functioning, physical, social, and emotional well-being. The three main types of trauma are acute trauma, so this results from a single incident; chronic trauma, this is repeated and prolonged, such as domestic violence or abuse; and then complex trauma, exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive and interpersonal nature. So children can experience various types of trauma, including natural disasters, sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence, medical injury, illness procedures, medical procedures, community violence, neglect, deprivation, traumatic grief, being the victim of a crime, kidnapping, accident, school violence, and loss of some kind. Impacts of trauma. Impacts of trauma include PTSD, depression, anxiety, alcohol and substance use, and life and relationships at work. So let's just unpack this a bit. PTSD, after experiencing a traumatic event, the development of post-traumatic stress syndrome can occur, manifesting itself in a variety of different ways. Depression is a common reaction after traumatic events. Anxiety, many people experience worry, fear and anxiety both during the event and after the traumatic event. Alcohol and substance abuse. Alcohol and drugs may help to numb painful emotions and memories in the short term, and they are coping mechanisms. Life and relationships at work can significantly impact family, social and work life. Racism. So racism is when the actions, attitudes, systems and policies create unequal opportunities and outcomes for people because of their race. Racism is more than just prejudice in thought and action, when this prejudice is accompanied by the power to discriminate, oppress or limit the rights of others. So what is the impact of racism? Poor mental health and to a lesser extent poor physical health. Stress can have a long-lasting physical effect by elevated blood pressure, weakening the immune system and raising the risk of developing long-term health conditions. Mental health issues such as depression, stress, emotional distress, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicidal thoughts. Social exclusion. This is a process that excludes individuals and groups from full participation in the society in which they live. excluded from community life, discriminated against when providing basic services, amenities and equal opportunities necessary for their development. And so what is the impact of social exclusion? It's the deprivation of choice, economic, educational, cultural and social choice, a poorer sense of well-being, negative impact on the quality of life, inequality and poverty, poor education and employment, social stigma and marginalisation, a fear complex, restriction from full participation in activities, economic, cultural and political. The keys to having a culturally appropriate and safe residential environment are the principles of access and equity, staff training and awareness, promote diversity and inclusion, remove barriers to inclusion, consult with others and refer. The principle of access and equity: access, services are available to everyone who's entitled to them and are free of any form of discrimination. Equity, services are developed and delivered on the basis of fair treatment of those eligible to receive them, promotes full and equal participation of all, fosters an environment that is free of discrimination and harassment, ensures that there is effective communication and engagement with all. Access and equity means ensuring that all, regardless of racial, religious, cultural, language backgrounds, make sure that all of those people enjoy full access to the services that they're entitled to. It's not about special services for people of diverse backgrounds or from non-English speaking backgrounds. It's just making sure that they enjoy that full access to services that they're entitled to. Identifying and removing barriers which prevent people from knowing, using and participating in a service they wish to utilise. An equitable, fair and just distribution of resources amongst all eligible, even if it means providing additional services or seeking additional services. Staff training and awareness. Be aware of ethnocentrism, the belief that your culture and way of life is best and other cultures are inferior. A lack of self-awareness can mean cultural bias and may result in discrimination. Try and correct any prejudices you may have regarding different cultural groups. Promote diversity and inclusion. Remove barriers. So remove barriers such as culturally sensitive display material, contact with families, deal with discriminatory practices, be aware of any physical contact, food services and religious practices. So I'm not sure if you understand what that means. So just making sure that any material we have displayed is culturally sensitive. Make sure that young people have contact with their families, and if discriminatory practices do come up, then deal with these. And just be aware of how culturally different people may want physical contact in a different way. They might want different food services, and they might have different religious practices or different religious practice requirements. Consult with others and refer. So sometimes you might need interpreters or cultural brokers. Obtain extra English tutoring if that's required. Find a cultural interpreter or broker. Students with signs of culture shock may need medical or psychological referral or referral to a counsellor. International students will need sympathetic and willing guardian. Ethnocentrism is the tendency to judge other cultures by the norms and standards of our own, especially with regard to language, behaviours, customs and religions. 7.4, developing culturally diverse relationships. The first thing here is just to take the time. Understand each other and respect our cultural differences is the key to good relationships between people from all backgrounds. Recognising our differences and realising how they affect us can become opportunities to learn and discover more about each other. Resources that support diversity. And you can see here this website that has toolkits on it. There are YouTube videos, lots of different resources that can support diversity. Some of these videos that are on YouTube, particularly the video, What Kind of Asian Are You? Or Playing for Change, or this Australia Post video, these can help young people discuss and think about diversity and how they can support people who are a little different to them. So the videos can be used as discussion starters. Show the video and discuss the message of valuing diversity from the video. You can get access to interpreters through the Australian government, the National Interpreter Service, but you might also be able to access interpreters and cultural brokers in your own organisation, maybe cultural brokers, family members, other students, parents, multicultural associations in the community. So there's lots of places where you can access interpreters if you need them. 7.6. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, or First Nations people. First Nations people face a range of issues, and there are complex reasons for these issues. Generations of negative treatment, discrimination, and a confusion of government legislation and policies have contributed to the issues that Aboriginal people may have to face. Political issues include paternalistic policies that restrict choices, presumably in the best interests of First Nations people and without their consent. So this is the government acting as parents. There is still a lack of self-determination. The goal is to change behaviour or lifestyle, for example, gambling, smoking, consumption of drugs and alcohol, or the reliance on welfare payments. More recent governments have made efforts to include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in decisions that affect them. Health issues. The standard of health amongst Aboriginal people is the lowest in the nation. They experience high levels of chronic illness, preventable diseases, mental and physical disability, which result in a reduced quality of life. Female Indigenous life expectancy is 75.6 years compared with 83.4 for non-Indigenous females. Male Indigenous life expectancy is 71.6 compared with 80.2 for non-Indigenous males. Issues that are factors in low standards of health include obesity and poor diet, smoking, drugs, sniffing glue, and petrol. And the reasons for these are complex. Health gap issues, high levels of chronic illness, preventable disease, disability, mental illness and poor nutrition. Health risk behaviours, for example, higher risk of smoking and drug and alcohol abuse. Social personal challenges, for example, poor school and employment engagement. Inadequate protection from child abuse and neglect, violence, crime experience. Feelings of hopelessness and a lack of control. Racism or lack of culture. Lack of positive role modelling of life skills. Social issues include these: displacement from country or homeland. Many Indigenous people who live in urban or regional centres are there because of circumstances beyond their control. Many are also living in accommodation rented from either government-provided housing or private landlords. Family violence and child abuse, a serious problem for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are between 2 and 5 times more likely than other Australians to experience violence as victims or offenders. Women are 5 times more likely to experience physical violence, 3 times more likely to experience sexual violence than other women. There has been silence and denial, and Kennedy, an Aboriginal woman who educates the Indigenous community on the issues of child sexual assault and the effects of domestic violence on children, states that as long as the veil of silence and denial remains over this area, the opportunities for children to suffer without help remain, as well as service available to the rest of the Australian society will not be adapted and made accessible for Aboriginal communities. So that's Kennedy, who's talking about silence and denial. Crime experience. The level of crime experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is very high in comparison to the rest of the Australian population. On average, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people experience considerably higher crime victimisation rates and higher imprisonment rates. Since 1989, the imprisonment rate of Aboriginal people has increased 12 times faster than the rate for non-Aboriginal people. Low educational attainment. In all regions of Australia, apart from the Torres Strait, Indigenous young people are less likely to complete Year 12 than their non-Indigenous counterparts. There have been some significant improvements. Between 2001 and the 2021 census, students aged 11 to 18 years attending secondary school increased by 145%, from 34,124 to 83,631. So that's a very significant increase. The number of persons aged 11 to 18 years old increased by 47% over the same period. And this means the proportion of persons attending secondary school has increased. Aboriginal students are 3 to 4 times more likely to be suspended from school, despite relevant research being near unanimous in suggesting that despite its frequent use, suspension is not an effective means for either reducing the incidence or changing the behavioural problems it is intended to address. And this comes from What Works, Reducing Suspensions. Economic issues, poverty and welfare dependence. Individual and generational poverty has had a devastating effect on Aboriginal people and communities. Lack of educational and vocational opportunity and long-term dependence on welfare creates a cycle of poverty. Aboriginal people continue to be overrepresented in welfare and child protection systems, and this is from a report on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander child safety, Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. Lower employment rates. In 2016, there were 222,636 Indigenous people aged over 15 years and over who were classified as employed. This represents 52% of the Indigenous population in that age group. 56% of working age Indigenous Australians, 15 to 64-year-old, were in the labour force in 2016, compared with nearly 80% of non-Indigenous Australians. In the 2016 census, 18% of Indigenous people were living in overcrowded dwellings, compared with 5% of non-Indigenous Australians. Indigenous Australians, over 22% of the homeless population nationally, estimated at about 23,500 people. Less likely to own their own home. 62% of all Australians live in owned or partially owned dwellings, but this is 38% for Indigenous people. 57% of Indigenous people live in some form of rental accommodation, compared with 29% for all of Australia. The difference in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and Western system. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander law, systems and structures recognise collective rights and interests, restore social relationships, restore a sense of cohesive collective identity, reaffirm systems of religious law and authority. But Australia's Western legal system has a focus on individual rights, separation of the interests and rights of the victim and the offender, representation by external legal advocates, and arm's length judgment and punishment by courts. So you can see here a comparison between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and Western culture. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people sometimes find it difficult to engage with Western systems and structures because the cultures that underpin these structures and systems are so different that they're almost opposites. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, systems and structures are very different and can make it to engage with these systems in a meaningful way. This might mean difficulty engaging with support agencies such as Centrelink, legal systems, health systems, government structures, education systems, and financial structures. The result is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people can often not understand the need to engage, be uncomfortable with the engagement process, not understand the processes for engagement, and have a basic mistrust of Western systems and structures. Because it is difficult to engage, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people do not participate in the benefits of these Western structures and systems to the same extent as other Australians, and then this adds again to the cycle of disadvantage. 7.8. Cultural barriers. Cultural barriers are located with the service and not with the student. Barriers are service's responsibility, and in boarding, we are a boarding service. It is the responsibility of a service or a boarding service to ensure that there is appropriate information available for culturally and linguistically diverse families, to know about the residents and their policies, to know how to use an interpreter. Staff are able to confidently engage with cultural brokers in their own local community to assist, and the residents has made links with multicultural organisations who can provide support. 7.9. Cross-cultural difficulties, and this will help you with assessments 7.2 and 7.3, which are scenarios. The 6 causes of cross-cultural difficulties, and this is from anthropologist Averick and Black. They explain these 6 causes of cross-cultural communication difficulties. Often we aren't aware how our own culture may be shaping our reactions. We try to see the world from another's point of view, and that will help us to be aware how our culture might be shaping our communication and our reactions. Number 1, different communication styles. So that's the way we use words, our gestures and facial expressions, our assertiveness, how we sit, the volume of our voice. These can all be interpreted in different ways in a conversation. Number 2, different attitudes towards conflict. Some cultures view conflict as a positive thing. Others view it as something to be avoided. Some like to deal with it in a face-to-face way. Others avoid confrontation, see it as embarrassing and demeaning, and best worked out over time behind the scenes. Different approaches to completing tasks. Some are more focused on building the relationship first. Others let it develop as they get on with the task. Different attitudes towards time can create tensions in a team. Some will feel more rewarded by completing the task than by working together happily. Different decision-making styles. This is number 4. In some cultures, decisions are delegated. Others want consensus in the group. Some like to keep control themselves. Different attitudes towards disclosure. In some cultures, it's not appropriate to be frank about emotions, the reasons behind a conflict or misunderstanding, or personal information. Questions that may seem natural to you other people may feel uncomfortable. For example, what was the conflict about? What was your role in the conflict? What was the sequence of events? And then, different approaches to knowing. This can affect the way of analysing a community problem or finding ways to resolve it. Some may want to do research to better understand and find solutions. Others just want to talk it out. Understanding individuals' styles of dealing with conflict. The Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, TKI, has 5 main styles of dealing with conflict situations, and this can help us identify which style we tend to when conflict arises. So number 1 is competitive, number 2 is collaborative, number 3 is compromising, number 4 is accommodating, number 5 is avoiding. So which one are you? Let's have a look at these. Competitive, these people take a firm stand and know what they want. They usually operate from a position of power, rank, expertise, or persuasive ability. It's useful in emergencies where a decision needs to be made fast, when a decision is unpopular, when defending people against someone who's trying to exploit the situation selfishly. But it can leave people feeling unsatisfied and resentful when used in less urgent situations. So that's competitive. Collaborative tries to meet the needs of all people involved. People can be highly assertive, but they cooperate effectively and acknowledge that everyone is important. This brings together a variety of viewpoints to get the best solution when the situation is too important for just a simple trade-off. Compromising. Trying to find a solution that will at least partially satisfy everyone. Everyone's expected to give up something to help the group. Useful when the cost of conflict is higher than the cost of losing ground or when there's a deadline looming. Accommodating, knows when to give in to others but can be persuaded to surrender a position even if it's not warranted. Not assertive equals highly cooperative. Accommodation is appropriate when issues matter more to the other party, when peace is more valuable than winning. And then avoiding. Willingness to meet the needs of others at the expense of the person's own needs, dislikes conflict and prefers to let others decide what to do. 7.3, conflict resolution and cultural safety. Cultural bias and misunderstanding can develop into conflict. Conflict based on a cultural issue or a cultural comment can hurt people and can make people from all minority groups feel uncomfortable or culturally unsafe. If the conflict is not handled effectively, the results can be damaging. By resolving conflict successfully, you can restore cultural safety and you can understand each other better. Intervention is a purposeful activity designed to deal with an issue to prevent it happening or manage it when it does happen. Intervention is the way you respond with any disciplinary action, referrals or supports. And we're suggesting two different types of intervention as conflict resolution approaches. The IBR, interest-based relational approach, and the restorative approach. So let's have a look at the IBR approach, interest-based relational approach. These are the steps. So you set the scene, you gather information, ask what is the actual disagreement about, agree on the problem, is there different behaviour management styles or is it something else, direct them to look at behaviour management policy, come to an agreement what they can do to be more consistent in behaviour, brainstorm possible solutions, find a middle ground, negotiate a solution, find a way to agree that they can work together without conflict. And possibly people will need to apologise and agree to do things differently. The restorative approach, and you use this when people are calm, when they've calmed down and they're ready to listen to each other. You can bring them back together and then you can ask these restorative questions. What happened? And then each person explains what happened and the other person sits there and listens without interrupting. How did this make you feel? And then how can we fix this? How can we restore relationship? Agree together on what the problem is and how they can fix this or make it better. So they're the two approaches to conflict resolution. And that is the end of this video. Thank you very much.